I'll be waiting by. Raymond. Chandler at Bacanalero in the morning. Carl the night. Porter turned down the last of 3 table lamps in the main lobby of the Wine Deer Hotel. The blue carpet darkened a shade or two on the walls, drew back into remoteness the chairs filled with shadowy loungers, and in the corners were memories like cobwebs. Tony. Rick yawned. He put his head on one side and listened to the frail, twittery music from the radio room beyond the dim arch at the far side of the lobby. He frowned. That should be his radio room after 1:00 a.m. Nobody should be in it. That red-haired girl was spoiling his nights. The frown passed, and a miniature of a smile quirked at the corners of his lips. He sat relaxed, a short, pale, paunchy, middle-aged man with long, delicate fingers clasped on the elk's tooth on his watch chain, the long, delicate fingers of a sleight of hand artist fingers with shiny, molded nails and tapering first joints, fingers a little spatulate at the ends, handsome fingers. Tony. Rick rubbed them together gently, and there was peace in his quiet sea-gray eyes. The frown came back on his face. The music annoyed him. He got up with a curious lias, all in one piece, without moving his clasped hands from the watch chain. At one moment he was leaning back relaxed, and the next he was standing balanced on his feet perfectly still, so that the movement of rising seemed to be a thing imperfectly perceived, an error of vision. He walked with small polished shoes delicately across the blue carpet, and under the arch the music was louder. It contained the hot acid. Blare the frenetic jittering runs of a jam session. It was too loud. The red-haired girl sat there and stared silently at the Fred part of the big radio cabinet as though she could see the band with its fixed professional grin and the sweat running down its back. She was curled up with her feet under her on a davenport which seemed to contain most of the cushions in the room. She was tucked among them carefully like a corsage in the florist's tissue paper. She didn't turn her head. She leaned there, one hand and a small fist on her peach-colored knee. She was wearing lounging pajamas of heavy-ribbed silk embroidered with black lotus buzz. You like Benny, Goodman, Miss, Cressy, Tony. Rick asked. The girl moved her eyes slowly. The light in the room was dim, but the violet of her eyes almost hurt. They were large, deep eyes, without a trace of thought in them. Her face was classical, and without expression. She said nothing. Tony smiled and moved his fingers at his sides one by one, feeling them move. I said you like good. Miss Crissy, he repeated gently. Not to cry over, the girl said, tonelessly. Tony rocked back on his heels and looked at her eyes, large, deep, empty eyes, or were they? He reached down and muted the radio. Don't get me wrong, the girl said. Goodman makes money, and the lad that makes legitimate money these days is a lad you have to respect, but this jitterbug music gives me the backdrop of a beer flat. I like a little something with roses in it. Maybe you like Mozart. Tony said, Go on, kid me. The girl said, Oh no, I wasn't kidding you, Miss Cressy. I think. Mozart was the greatest man that ever lived, and Toscanini is his prophet. I thought you were just the house detective. She put her head back on a pillow and stared at him through her lashes. Go ahead, make me some of that Mozart, she added. It's too late. Tony sighed. You can't get it now. She gave him another long, lucid glance. You got the eye on me, haven't you? Flatfoot. She laughed a little, almost under her breath. H, tell me what did I do wrong? Tony smiled his toy smile. Nothing. Miss Cressy, nothing at all, but you need some fresh air. You've been 5 days in this hotel, and you haven't been outdoors, and you have a tower room. She laughed again. So make me a story about it. I'm bored. Well, there was a girl here once, and she had you sweet. She stayed in the hotel a whole week like you without going out at all. I mean, she didn't speak to anybody. Hardly. What do you think she did? Then the girl eyed him. Gravely she jumped her bill. He put his long, delicate hand out and turned it, slowly fluttering the fingers with an effect almost like a lazy wave breaking. She sent down for her bill, and she paid it. Then she told the Hop to be back in half an hour for her suitcases. Then she went out on her balcony. The girl leaned forward a little, her eyes still grave, one hand capping her peach-colored knee. What did you say your name was? I'm Tony. Rick's. Rick sounds. European, yeah. Tony said. Polish, go on. Tony, or the tower. Suites have private balconies. Miss, how? Chrissy, the walls of them are way too low for 14 stories above the street. It was a dark night. That night, high clouds, he dropped his hands with a final gesture. A farewell gesture. Nobody saw her jump. But when she hit, it was like a big gun going off. You're making it up. Tony, her voice was a clean, dry whisper of sound. He smiled his toy smile. His quiet sea-gray eyes seemed almost to be smoothing the long waves of her hair. Eve Creasy, he said. Musingly, a name waiting for lights to be in, no, waiting for a tall, dark guy that's no good. Tony, you wouldn't care why. I was married to him once. I might be married to him again. You know, you can make a lot of mistakes in just one lifetime. The hand on her knee opened slowly until the fingers were strained back as far as they would go. Then they closed quickly and tightly, and even in that dim light, the knuckles shone like little polished bones. I played him a low trick once. I put him in a bad place without meaning to. You wouldn't care about that either. It's just that. I owe him something. He leaned over softly and turned the knob on the radio. A waltz formed itself dimly on the warm air. A Tinza waltz, but a waltz? He turned the volume up. The music gushed from the loudspeaker in a swirl of shadowed melody synths. Vienna died, all waltzes are shadowed. The girl put her head on one side and hummed 3 or 4 bars and stopped with a sudden tightening of her mouth. Eve Crazy, she said it was in lights once at a bum nightclub a dive. They raided it and then those lights went out. He smiled at her almost mockingly. I bet it was no dive while you were there, miss. Cressy? Oh, that's the waltz the orchestra always played when the old. Porter walked up and down in front of the hotel entrance, all swelled up with his medals on his chest. The last laugh with Emil Jannings. I guess you wouldn't remember that movie. Miss Creasy. No, she said. I never saw it. He walked 3 steps away from her and turned. I got to go upstairs and palm some doorknobs. I hope it didn't bother you, but you really ought to go to bed now. It's pretty late, the tin seal. Ward stopped and a voice began to talk. The girl spoke to the voice. You really thought something like that about the balcony? He nodded. I might have, but I don't anymore, no chance. Tony, her smile was a dim, lost leaf. Come on, talk to me. Some more redheads don't jump. Tony, they hang on and wither. He looked at her gravely for a moment and then moved away over the carpet. The porter was standing in the archway that led to the main lobby. Tony hadn't looked that way yet, but he knew somebody was there. He always knew if anybody was close to him, he could hear the grass grow. The porter jerked his chin at him urgently. His broad face above the uniform collar looked sweaty and excited. Tony stepped up to him close, and they went together through the arch and out to the middle of the dim lobby. Trouble? Tony asked wearily. There's this guy outside to see you. Tony, he won't come in. I'm doing a wipe off of the plate glass of the doors, and he came right up beside me, this tall guy I get. Tony, he says out of the side of his mouth. Tony said, and looked at the porter's pale blue eyes. Who was it? Al, he said. To say he was. Tony's face became as expressionless as D. Oh, okay, he started to move off. The porter caught his sleeve. Listen. Tony, you got any enemies? Tony laughed politely, his face still like dough. The porter held his sleeve tightly. Listen, Tony, there's a big black car down the block. The other way from the hack, there's a guy standing beside it with his foot up on the running board. This guy that spoke to me, he wears a dark collar wrap-around overcoat with a high collar all turned up against his ears. His house way low. You can hardly see his face. He says, get. Tony out of the side of his mouth. You ain't gotten any enemies, have you? Tony, only the finance company. Tony said, all right, beat it. He walked slowly and a little stiffly across the blue carpet up the 3 shallow steps to the entrance lobby with the 3 elevators on one side and the desk on the other. Only one elevator was working beside the open doors. His arms folded, the night operator stood silent in a neat blue uniform with silver facings, a lean, dark Mexican boy named Gomez, a new boy breaking in on the night shift. The other side was the desk. Rose marble with the night clerk leaning on it delicately, a small, neat man with a wispy reddish mustache and cheeks so rosy they looked rouged he stared at. Tony and poked a nail at his mustache. Tony pointed a stiff index finger at him, folded the other 3 fingers tight to his palm, and flicked his thumb up and down on the stiff finger. The clerk touched the other side of his mustache and looked bored. Tony went on past the closed and darkened newsstand and the side entrance to the drugstore out to the brass-bound plate glass doors. He stopped just inside them and took a deep, hard breath. He squared his shoulders, pushed the doors open, and stepped out into the cold, damp night air. The street was dark, silent, the rumble of traffic on. Wilshire, 2 blocks away, had nobody. No meaning to the left. There were 2 taxis their driver's leaned against, defenders side by side, smoking. Tony walked the other way. The big dark car was a third of the block from the hotel entrance. Its lights were dimmed, and it was only when he was almost up to it that he heard the gentle sound of its engine turning over. A tall dark figure detached itself from the body of the car and strode toward him, both hands in the pockets of the dark overcoat with a high collar from the man's mouth. The screw's cigarette tip glowed faintly, a rusty pearl. They stopped 2 teeth from each other. The tall man said, "Hey." Tony, long time no see, hello. Al, how's it going? Can't complain. The tall man started to take his right hand out of his overcoat pocket, then stopped and laughed quietly. I forgot. I guess you don't want to shake hands that don't mean anything. Tony said, shaking hands. Monkeys can shake hands. What's on your mind? Al still the funny little fat guy, eh? Tony, I guess. Tony winked his eyes tight. His throat felt tight. You like your job back there. It's a job. Al laughed his quiet laugh again. You take it slow, Tony. I'll take it fast so it's a job and you want to hold it. Okay, there's a girl named Eve Creasy who's flopping in your quiet. Hotel get her out fast and right now what's the trouble? Tony asked. The tall man looked up and down the street. The man behind in the car coughed lightly. She's hooked with the wrong number. Nothing against her personally, but she'll lead trouble too. You get her out. Tony, you got maybe an hour, sure. Tony said aimlessly, without meaning. Al took his hand out of his pocket and stretched it against Tony's chest. He gave him a light, lazy pea push. I wouldn't be telling you just for the hell of it. Little fat brother, get her out of there, okay? Tony said without any tone in his voice. The tall man took his hand back and reached for the car door. He opened it and started to slip in like a lean black shadow. Then he stopped and said something to the man in the car and got out. Again. He came back to where Tony stood silent, his pale eyes catching a little dim light from the street. Listen, Tony, you always kept your nose clean. You're a good brother. Tony didn't speak. Al leaned toward him, a long urgent shadow, the high collar almost touching his ears. It's trouble business, Tony. The boys won't like it. But I'm telling you, just the same, this Eve Creasy, she was married to a guy named Johnny Rolls. Rolls just got out of squid in 2-3 days, maybe a week. He did a 3-spot for manslaughter. The girl put him there. He ran down an old man one night when he was drunk, and she was with him. He wouldn't stop, and she told him to go in and tell it, or else he didn't go in. So the Johns came for him. Tony said, that's too bad. It's kosher, kid. It's my business to know this. Rolls flapped his mouth and stirred about how his girl would be waiting for him when he got out, all set to forgive and forget, and he was going straight to her. Tony said, so what's he to you? His voice had a dry, stiff crackle like thick paper. Al laughed. The troubled boys want to see him. He ran a table at a spot on the strip and figured out a scheme. He and this other guy took the house for 50 grand. The other one coughed up, but we still need. Johnny's 25. The trouble boys don't get paid to forget. Tony looked up and down the dark street. One of the taxi drivers flicked a cigarette stub in a long arc over the top of one of the cabs. Tony watched it fall and spark on the pavement. He listened to the quiet sound of the big car's motor. I don't want any part of it, he said. I'll get her out. Al backed away from him, nodding a wise kid. So, how's? Mom, these days, she's okay. Tony said to tell her. I was asking for her, you know. Asking for her isn't anything, Tony said. Al turned quickly and got back into the car. The car curved lazily in the middle of the block and drifted back toward the corner. Its lights went up and sprayed in a wall. It turned the corner and was gone. The lingering smell of its exhaust drifted past. Tony's nose he turned and walked back to the hotel and into it. He went along to the radio room. The radio still muttered, but the girl was gone from the davenport in front of it. The pressed cushions were hollowed out by her body. Tony reached down and touched them. He thought they were still warm. He turned the radio off and stood there turning a thumb slowly in front of his body, his hand flat against his stomach. Then he went back through the lobby and toward the elevator bank and stood. Beside a maiolica jar of white sand, the clock passed from behind a pebbled glass screen on one end of the desk. The air was dead. The elevator bank was dark. Tony looked at the indicator of the middle car and saw that it was at 14 gone to bed. He said under his breath. The door of the porter room beside the elevators opened, and the night operator came out in his street clothes. He looked at Tony with a quiet sideways look out of eyes the color of dried-out chestnuts. Good night, boss. Yeah. Tony said absently. He took a thin dappled cigar out of his vest pocket and smelled it. He examined it, slowly turning it around in his neat fingers. There was a small tear along the side. He frowned at that and put the cigar away. There was a distant sound, and the hand on the indicator began to steal around the bronze dial. Light glittered up in the shaft and the straight line of the car. Floor dissolved the darkness. Below, the car stopped, and the doors opened, and Carl the porter came out of it. His eyes caught Tony's with a kind of jump, and he walked over towards him, his head on one side, a thin shine along his pink upper lip. Oh, hey, listen. Tony took his arm in a hard, swift hand and turned him. He pushed him quickly, yet somehow casually, down the steps to the dimmer main lobby and steered him into a corner. He let go of the arm. His throat tightened again, for no reason that he could think of. Well, he said. Darkly listened to what the porter reached into a pocket and hauled out a dollar bill. He gave me this, he said loosely. His glittering eyes looked past Tony's shoulder at nothing. They winked rapidly. You know, for ice and ginger ale, don't stall. Tony growled the guy up in 14B. The porter said, let me smell your breath. The porter leaned towards him. Obediently, liquor, Tony said harshly. He gave me a drink. Tony looked down at the dollar bill. Nobody's in 14B, not on my list. He said, yeah, there is the porter. Licked his lips, and his eyes opened and shut several times. A tall, dark guy. All right? Tony said crossly. All right. So there's a tall, dark guy in 14B, and he gave you $1 and a drink. Then what? There was a gun under his arm, Carl said, and blinked. Tony smiled, but his eyes had taken on the lifeless glitter of thick ice you take. Miss Creasy up to her room. Carl shook his head. Gomez. I saw her go up. Get away from me, Tony said between his teeth. And don't accept any more drinks from the guests. He didn't move until. Carl had gone back into his cubby hole by the elevators and shut the door. Then he moved silently up to 3 steps and stood in front of the desk, looking at the veined rose marble. The onyx pen set the fresh registration card in its leather frame. He lifted a hand and smacked it down hard on the marble. The clerk popped out from behind the glass screen like a chipmunk coming out of his hole. Tony took a small notebook out of his breast pocket and spread it on the desk. I don't see a 14B on this, he said in a bitter voice. The clerk whispered politely at his mustache. So sorry, you must have been out to suffer. When he checked in, registered as James Watton, son, Diego. The clerk yawned. Did he ask for anybody? The clerk stopped in the middle of the yawn and looked at the top of Tony's head. Oh, yes, he asked for a full swing band. Why? Wow, smart, fast, and funny. Tony said if you like him that way. He wrote on his notebook and stuffed it back into his pocket. I'm going upstairs too. Palm some doorknobs. You know there's 4 tower rooms up there that you ain't rented yet, so you better get up on your toes, son, slipping. I make out the clerk drawled and completed his yawn, hurry, back pops. I don't know how. I'll get through the time you could shave that pink fuzz off your lip, Tony said, and I went across to the elevators. He opened up a dark one, lit the dome light, and shut the car up to 14. He darkened it again, stepped out, and closed the doors. This lobby was smaller than any other except the one immediately below it. It had a single blue P-panel door in each of the walls. Other than the elevator wall, on each door was a gold number and a letter with a gold wreath around it. Tony walked over to 14 and put his ear to the panel. He heard nothing. Eve Creasy might be in bed asleep or in the bathroom or out on the balcony, or she might be sitting there in the room a few feet from the door looking at the wall. Well, he wouldn't expect to be able to hear her sit and look at the wall. He went over to 14B and put his ear to that panel. This was different. There was sound in there. A man coughed. It sounded somehow like a solitary cough. There were no voices. Tony pressed the small mother-of-pearl button beside the doorsteps. Came without hurry. A thickened voice spoke to the panel. Tony made no answer. No sound. The thickened voice repeated the question lightly and maliciously. Tony pressed the bell again. Mr. James Wotton of San Diego should now open the door and give forth a noise. He didn't. A silence fell beyond that door that was like the silence of a glacier. Once more Tony put his ear to the wood. Silence utterly. He got out a master key on a chain and pushed it delicately into the lock of the door. He turned. It pushed the door inward. 3 in and withdrew the key. Then he waited. All right, the voice said harshly. Come on in and get it. Tony pushed the door wide and stood there, framed against the light from the lobby. The man was tall, black-haired, angular, and white-faced. He held a gun. He held it as though he knew about guns. Step right in, he drawled. Tony went into the door and pushed it shut with his shoulder. He kept his hands a little out from his sides. The clever fingers curled and slack. He smiled his quiet little smile. Mr. Wayton, and after that, what? I'm the house detective here, huh? It slays me the tall, white-faced, somehow handsome and somehow not handsome man backed slowly into the room. It was a large room with a low balcony around 2 sides of it. French doors opened out onto the little private open-air balcony that each of the tower rooms had. There was a great set for a log fire behind a panel screen in front of a cheerful Davenport. A tall misty glass stood on a hotel tray beside a deep, cozy chair. The man backed toward us this and stood in front of it. The large, glistening gun drooped and pointed at the floor. It slays me, he said. I'm in this dump an hour, and the house copper already gives me the buzz. Okay, sweetheart, look in the closet in the bathroom, but she just left. You didn't see her yet. Tony said, the man's bleached face filled with unexpected lines. His thickened voice edged towards a snarl. Yeah, who didn't? I see yet a girl named Eve Creasy. The man swallowed. He put his gun down on the table beside the tray. He let himself down into the chair, backward, stiffly like a man with a touch of lumbago. Then he leaned forward and put his hands on his kneecaps and smiled brightly between his teeth. So she got here, huh? I didn't ask about her yet. I'm a careful guy. I didn't ask yet. She's been here 5 days. Tony said, just waiting for you. She hasn't left the hotel for a minute. The man's mouth worked a little. His smile had a knowing tilt to it. I got delayed a little up north, he said smoothly. You know how it is visiting old friends. You seem to know a lot about my business, copper. That's right. Mr. Rolls. The man lunged to his feet and his hand snapped at the gun. He stood leaning over, holding it on the table, staring. Dames talk too much, he said, with a muffled sound in his voice, as though he held something soft between his teeth and talked through it. Not. Dames. Mr. Rolls, what the gun slithered on the hardwood of the table, talk it up copper, my man reader, just quit not. Dames, guys with guns. The glacier-ish silence fell between them again. The man straightened his body slowly. His face was washed clean of expression, but his eyes were haunted. Tony leaned in front of him, a shortish, plump man with a quiet, pale, friendly face and eyes as simple as forest water. They'd never run out of gas, those boys, Johnny Rolls said, and licked at his lip. Early and late they work. That old firm never sleeps, you know who they are, Tony said softly. I could maybe give 9 guesses, and 12 of them would be right. H, the Trouble Boys, Tony said, and he smiled a brittle smile. Where is she? Johnny Rolls asked harshly. Right next door to you. The man walked to the wall and left his gun lying on the table. He stood in front of the wall, studying it. He reached up and gripped the grill work of the balcony railing. When he dropped his hand and turned, his face had lost some of its lines. His eyes had a quieter glint. He moved back to Tony and stood over him. I've got a stake, he said. Eve sent me some dough, and I built it up with a touch. I made up North emergency dough. What? I mean, the Trouble Boys talk about 25 grand. He smiled crookedly. Maybe 500. I can count, and I'd have a lot of fun making them believe that. What did you do with it? Tony asked indifferently. I never had it leave that lay. I'm the only guy in the world who believes it. It was a little deal. I got suckered on. I'll believe it. Tony said, you know they don't kill often, but they can be awful tough mugs. Tony said, with a sudden bitter contempt. Guys with guns. Just mugs. Johnny Rolls reached for his glass and drained it empty. The ice cubes tinkled softly as he put it down. He picked his gun up, danced it on his palm, then tucked it nose down into an inner breast pocket. He stared at the carpet. Why are you telling me this, copper? I thought maybe you'd give her a break, and if. I wouldn't. I kind of think you will, Tony said. Johnny Rolls nodded quietly. Can. I get out of here. You could take the service elevator down to the garage. You could rent a car. I can give you a car to the garage. Man, you're a funny little guy, Johnny Rolls said. Tony took out a worn ostrich skin billfold and scribbled on a printed card. Johnny Rolls read it and stood, holding it, tapping it against the thumbnail. I could take her with me, he said, his eyes narrow. Yeah, you can take a ride in a basket too. Tony says she's been up here for 5 days. I told you she's been spotted, a guy. I know he called me up and told me to get her out of here. He told me what it was all about, so I'm getting you out instead. They'll love that. Johnny Rolls said, they'll send you violets. I'll weep about it on my day off. Johnny Rolls turned his hand over and stared at the palm. I could still see her anyway, before. I blow next door to hear you said. Tony turned on his heel and started for the door, he said over his shoulder. Don't waste a lot of time, handsome. I might change my mind, the man said almost gently. You might be spotting me right now for all I know. Tony didn't turn his head. That's a chance you're going to have to take. He went on to the door and passed out of the room. He shut it carefully, silently looked once at the door of Wara A and got into his dark elevator. He rode it down to the linen room floor and got out to move the basket that held the service elevator open. At that floor, the door slid quietly shut. He held it so it made no noise down the corridor. Light came from the open door of the housekeeper's office. Tony got back into his elevator and went on down to the lobby. The little clerk was out of sight behind his pebble glass screen auditing accounts. Tony went through the main lobby and turned into the radio room. The radio was on again. Soft, she was there, curled on the davenport. Again. The speaker hummed to her a vague sound so low that what it said was as wordless as the murmur of trees. She turned her head slowly and smiled at him, finished palming doorknobs. I couldn't sleep with a nickel, so I came back down again. Are you okay? He smiled and nodded. He sat down in a green chair and patted the plump brocade arms of it. Sure, miss. Cressy waiting's the hardest kind of work, isn't it? I wish you talked to that radio. It sounds like a pretzel being bent. Tony fiddled with it, got nothing he liked, and set it back where it had been. Beer. Parlor drunks are all the customers now. She smiled at him again. I don't bother you being here, miss. Cressy. I like it, you're a sweet little guy. Tony, he looked stiffly at the floor, and a ripple touched his spine. He waited for it to go away. It went slowly. Then he sat back relaxed again. His neat fingers clasped on his elk's tooth. He listened, not to the radio, but to far off, and things, menacing things, and perhaps to just the safe whir of wheels going away into a strange night. You know, nobody's all bad, he said out loud. The girl looked at him lazily. I've met 2 or 3 that I was wrong on. Then he nodded and admitted judiciously, yeah, I guess there's some that are. The girl yawned and her deep violet eyes half closed. She nestled back into the cushions. Sit there a while. Tony, maybe. I could nap, sure not a thing for me to do sometimes. I don't know why they pay me. She slept quickly and with complete stillness like a child. Tony hardly breathed for 10 minutes. He just watched her, his mouth a little open. There was a quiet fascination in his limpid eyes as if he was looking at an altar. Then he stood up with infinite care and padded away under the arch to the entrance. Lobby in the desk. He stood at the desk, listening for a little while. He heard a pen rustling out of sight. He went around the corner to the row of house phones and little glass cubby holes. He lifted one and asked the night operator for the garage. It rang 3 or 4 times, and then a boyish voice answered, Windeer. Hotel garage. Speaking, this is Tony. Rick the guy. Watton. I gave a card. Did he leave? Sure. Tony, half an hour, almost, is it? Your charge? Yeah. Tony said, my party. Hey, thanks. I'll be seeing you. He hung up and scratched his neck. He went back to the desk and slapped a hand on it. The clerk wafted himself around the screen with his greeter smile in place. It dropped when he saw, Tony, can't a guy catch up on his work? He grumbled, what's the professional rate on 14B? The clerk stared morosely. There's no professional rate in the tower. Yeah, well, make it one. The guy left already. He's only there an hour. Well, the clerk said, Ailey, so the personality didn't click tonight. H, we got to skip out. Well, $5. Satisfy you, a friend of yours. No, just a drunk with delusions of grandeur and no. D, guess we'll have to let it ride. Tony, how did he get out? I took him down the service elevator while you were asleep, so will $5 satisfy you or not? Why, hi, the worn ostrich skin wallet came out, and a weedy 5 slipped across the marble awl. I could shake him for. Tony said. Loosely, the clerk took the 5 and looked puzzled. Well, you're the boss, he said, and shrugged. The phone shrilled on the desk, and he reached for it. He listened and then pushed it towards. Tony, for you. Tony took the phone and cuddled it close to his chest. He put his mouth close to the transmitter. The voice was strange to him. It had a metallic sound. Its syllables were meticulously anonymous. Tony. Tony. Rick talking, a message from. I'll shoot. Tony looked at the clerk. Hey, be a pal, huh? He said over the mouthpiece. The clerk flicked a narrow smile at him and went away. Shoot. Tony said into the phone. We had a little business with a guy in your place, picked him up. Scrumming. Al had a hunt. You'd run him out, tailed him, and took him to the curb. Not so good a backfire. Tony held the phone very tight, and his temples chilled with the evaporation of moisture. Go on, he said. I guess there's more. Yeah, a little. The guy stopped the big one cold. Al said to tell you goodbye. Tony leaned hard against the desk. His mouth made a sound that was not speech, get it. The metallic voice sounded impatient, a little bored. This guy had a rod, he used it. Your brother won't be phoning anybody anymore. Tony lurched at the phone, and the base of it shook on the rose marble. His mouth was a hard, dry knot. The voice said, That's as far as we go, bud. Good night. The phone clicked dry like a pebble hitting a wall. Tony put the phone down in its cradle very carefully, so as not to make any sound. He looked at the clenched palm of his left hand. He took a handkerchief out and rubbed it. palmed softly and straightened the fingers out with his other hand. Then he wiped his forehead. The clock came around the screen again and looked at him with glinting eyes. I'm off. Friday. How about lending me that phone number? Tony nodded at the clerk and smiled a minute. Frail smile, he put his handkerchief away and patted the pocket he had put it in. He turned and walked away from the desk across the entrance. Lobby down the 3 shallow steps along the shadowy reaches of the main lobby, and so in through the arch to the radio room once more. He walked softly like a man moving a room where somebody is very sick. He reached the chair he had sat in before and lowered himself into it inch by inch. The girl slept on, motionless in that curled-up looseness achieved by some women and all cats. Her breath made no slightest sound against the vague murmur of the radio. Tony. Rick leaned back in the chair and clasped his hands on his elk's tooth and quietly closed his eyes. So that was I'll Be Waiting by the legendary hard-boiled detective novelist, Raymond. Chandler, it was narrated for us by Brendan Sullivan, and I'll put some links to Brendan's works and how you can get in touch with him, hopefully, if you want to hire him as a narrator. You can get a hold of him through the show notes. So a fantastic piece of work he did, all the engineering, everything. I didn't do anything to that, so all the mistakes came to me clean. It was a lovely, lovely piece of work, and I was very happy to use it. I'll Be Waiting by Raymond. Chandler, let us say something about Raymond. Chandler, for those of you who are not aware of him, there may be somebody, so Raymond. Chandler was born in 1888 and died in 1959. He was a British American novelist and screenwriter renowned for his contributions to the hard-boiled detective fiction genre. Born on July 23rd, 1888 in Inichi, Chicago, Illinois. The Chandler spent most of his formative years in England after his parents' separation. Chandler's early career was diverse. He worked in the British Civil Service and later joined the Canadian Army during World War. Following the World War, he moved to the U.S. and embarked on a career in the oil industry, and it wasn't until the age of 44 that he turned to writing fiction. His breakthrough came with the publication of The Big Sleep in 1939 in Globe, introducing the iconic private detective Philip Marlowe. Chandler's writing was characterized by its gritty realism, sharp dialogue, and keen understanding of human nature. The success of The Big Sleep marked the beginning of a series of novels featuring Marlowe, including Farewell, My Lovely, 1940, and The Long Goodbye, 1953. Apart from his novels, Chandler also made significant contributions to Hollywood as a screenwriter. He adapted works for film, including James M. Cain, another hard-boiled writer, Double, Indemnity, 1944. His unique style and ability to capture the dark underbelly of society distinguished his screenplays. Chandler's influence on crime fiction is immeasurable. His impact extends beyond the genre, as his works have been adapted into numerous films and TV series. His legacy endures as a pioneer in hardboiled detective literature, with his writing style continuing to inspire contemporary crime writers. Remy Chandler passed away on March 26, 1959 in Loyola. I'm sure that I don't know what. I kind know what you say in America. Lola, La Jolla, La Jolla, probably in Spanish, California. Despite a relatively brief literary career, his contributions to the world of detective fiction have left an indelible mark. Indeed, that is true, the story I'll Be Waiting that we just heard. It was published in 1939 in the Saturday Evening Post. On October 14th, a hotel detective makes a bad error of judgment. That's a good logline, isn't it? So a little bit more about Chandler from another source. Due to his straitened financial circumstances during the Great Depression, Chandler turned his latent writing talent era living, teaching himself to write pulp fiction by studying the Perry Mason story formula of Ard Stanley Gardner. Chandler's first professional work was Blackmailers Don't Shoot. It was published in Black Mask we've heard much about. Be all black masculines who've been talking about hardboiled American Pulp, detective story magazine, launched and supported the careers of most of the hardboiled guys. 39 was his first novel with Philip Marlowe, speaking in the first person. So yeah, we'll talk about the features of a hard-boiled later in 1950. Chandler described it in a letter to his English publisher H. Hamilton while he began reading pulp magazines and later wrote for them. And this is what Chandler says, wondering. BR up and down the Pacific coast in an automobile. I began to read pulp magazines because they were cheap enough to throw away and because I never had any time, any taste for the kind of thing which is known as women's magazines. This was the great days of Black Mask, if I may call them great days. This is Chandler saying, and it struck me that some of the writing was pretty forceful and honest, even though it had its crude aspect. I decided this might be a good way to try to learn to write fiction and get paid a small amount of money at the same time. I spent 5 months over an 18,000-word novelette and sold it for $180 after that. I never looked back, although I had a good many uneasy periods looking forward. That is a rare sentence, I never looked back. Other had good many looking forward. So it's a balanced sentence that is a sentence of somebody who knows how to write. Some of my favorites sentences actually come from Chandler. I collect beautiful sentences. I've got a database where I put beautiful as what I think beautiful sentences. I should say was I'll be watching was illustrated by Hi Rubin, and there's a fantastic I've just looked up on the internet, absolutely fantastic picture of two toughs outside, lovely hard-boiled, and film noir, of course, is very closely related to hard-boiled. A lot of it takes place at night. Not particularly, anyway. Before I got digressing, I digressed to myself, diverted myself. What we've got is sentences, not from this, but just two lovely Chandler sentences, which shows his ability to really turn out nice. English. So under the thinning fog, the surf curled up and creamed almost without sound, like a thought trying to form itself on the edge of consciousness. Wow, another one. She smelled the way the Taj Mahal looks by moonlight. Ain't that good? So and you see, and the other thing that strikes you about Chandler is, I mean, these guys are they quip, don't they have these witty one-liners, which later on we see this in the action movies, Superman and all these people, all these action movies, and they all have these that's I can't even think of any at the top of my head, but you know what? I mean, when they're killing some bad guy, they make some comment, and that'll teach you to eat custard or whatever. I made that one up on the spot. I don't know if you realize that. And so yeah, and the other thing about Chandler is, and I haven't got any example, let me see if I can find any in the story itself. I've got the cover for it, and I've got to give you some notes. What he does is he introduces the character, and he gives you a little own line or TW line, physical description of him, and it fixes the character in your mind. So he sees the waiter in his blue uniform with the silver piping on it. Boom, you've got him. So here you go. He's a relaxed, short, pale, paunchy, middle-aged man with long, delicate fingers clasped on an elk's tooth on his watch chain. There's a guy called Dwight. Swain teaches how to write as well. And this was his genre. And he says, 1-2 line description and almost like a motif. And if you can give them something like a bracelet or an elk's chain, and it helps anchor the character, because in a story, the reader may get lost between different characters, and you go, his TNY blonde hair, his unkempt blonde hair, boom, his silver buckle shoes, boom, and you've got the picture. So he does this. This is a trick. This is not a trick. It's a technique, So yeah. So what he, and let me see what he says about the red girl. She was cured up with her feet upon a davenport, which seemed to contain most of the cushions in the room. Clever, 'cause it doesn't does it. She was tucked among them carefully, like a corsage in the florist's tissue paper. She didn't turn her head. She leaned there, one hand in a small fist on her peach-colored Nikki. She was wearing lounging pajamas of heavy-ribbed silk embroidered with black lotus buds. Yeah, great stuff, isn't it? Great stuff. I love it. I don't know about you, but I love it. I hope you do my copy of the story usefully. It has some notes it says. Goodman refers to musician. Benny. Goodman on one page 572, there are several contemporary cultural references. The Last Laugh is a 1924 movie starring Emile. Jennings Spring, Beautiful Spring, also known as Chimes of Spring, was a song written by Paul. Link in 1903, The Bluebird was Morse Metal. Link's 1909 allegorical play, which became a movie in 1918. So I hope you are paying attention, and now you've gone, aha, that's what he meant. But there we are. We are in a review of this particular story. It talks about, the tale is marked by Chandler's adept portrayal of the SD underbelly of society and his exploration of the moral ambiguity that often characterizes his protagonists. So, noir genre or hard-boiled takes place at night. Hence, noir often filmed in black and white but told in the first person. I've said this before. One of my, when you pass it, like Chinatown, which great movie, but made much later than the glory days of a hard boil. There was in Chinatown again, and I talk about how Blade Runner, the 1980 version, the first version starts out with Deka being this CD private detective. I know he's a Blade Runner, but it's equivalent, morally ambiguous. A life characterized by all of these guys drink cigarettes, morals ambiguity. They are not good men in many cases, or they are good men basically. But you have to dig a bit because they don't look like good men, they don't behave like good men, and you find the goodness in them. And I think that's one of the great things about the genre. There are these guys, you're rooting for them because even though they're failed human beings, like we are ourselves, well, I speak for myself, obviously. We find the goodness in them, and the strength and the morality is in them. And that is a great joy. This world, weary as they are, think of Rick in Casablanca. It's a kind of hard-boiled. Rick's a tough guy, isn't he? In Casablanca, he doesn't want to do the right thing, but he ends up doing the right thing because that's the nature of it. Also spoken in slang. So instead of the Highfuton literary language of almost even con and oil, really, and the kind of the Gentile sleuths of the English tradition. These guys speak straight, and I guess that the influence in modern detective stories is immense, really, isn't it? Because they are morally ambiguous as they are. Street, they are in your face. They're not these Yuko or somebody said to me before on the blue geranium, I must have been talking about Miss Merrill, and they heard me say Miss Marble. I said Miss Marl, but and they said, by the way, it is Miss Marble, and I said no, it's not. It's Miss Marble, and Hercules Parrot. Anyway, you're probably sick of me by now. So that's it. What a great story, Hard-Boiled. We've done a bit of Hard-Boiled, we did. Carol, John, Daly, we did. We've done Dashiell, Hammett, we've done now. Raymond, Chandler. I think we've visited Hard-Boiled. I think we're going to probably flip back to some Gentile sleuth. Let me know what you prefer, to be honest. You drop some comments on the reviews and stuff like that. Maybe like both, like me. I like them both. You can like them both. You can like apples and oranges. You don't have to like just one. So if you liked it, I hope you did. And if you like Brendan Sullivan, remember that name. Brendan Sullivan. What a great narrator. Give him a round of applause. Drop some positive comments as well for Brendan, so he can read them and realize that his talent is recognized. Okay, speak to you soon in the spirit of recognizing everybody's talent. The music is the Black Cat by Aaron Kelly.